What's up, guys? So there's been an update on the Amber Heard appeal, and some parties have filed an amicus brief. And what that is where another party that is not a party to the lawsuit, third party or third parties, file a brief describing what they think could be the outcomes of this case if they were to rule in a certain situation or rule in a certain way, and try to persuade the court to look at other factors as well and also give their input. These are never mandatory, as it's filed by not even parties to that lawsuit. And so it has some good points in there, and this kind of follows up on the video that we did about people supporting Amber Heard. And so in this, there are people that are supporting Amber Heard. And so let's take a look at it. So right here in the Court of Appeals of Virginia, and this is who's filing it. So brief, Sanctuary for Families, the Virginia National Organization for Women, the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Equality Now, Esperanza United, the Feminist Majority Foundation, Battered Women's Justice Project, the Women's Equal Justice Project, National Crime Victim Law Institute, the Coalition Against Trafficking Women, Professor Catherine McKinnon, and the organizations, professors, advocates, and professionals listed in Appendix A. So these are the lawyers who drafted it, and this is just the table of contents with the authorities that they cite to different articles, cases, and all of that. Identities and interests of Amici Curiae are leading nonprofit organizations, professors, victim advocates, professionals around the world dedicated to advancing the safety and well-being of survivors of domestic violence. Collectively, Amici provide a broad range of legal and other services to victims of domestic violence and are active contributors to and experts in the scholarship surrounding the dynamics of domestic violence. Amici are concerned because the jury verdict reflects a deep and dangerous ignorance of coercive tactics and non-physical forms of abuse that are critical components of domestic violence. Amici also wish to advise the court of the troubling chilling effects this highly publicized verdict will have on victims of abuse seeking to protect themselves, report abuse, and raise awareness. Now, with that, that's not really a concern because, first of all, a complete defense to defamation, libel, and slander is the truth. That's a complete defense. So if you're telling the truth, then you shouldn't have any issues. However, in this case, the jury found that Amber Heard did not tell the truth, that she was lying. And so pretty much what they're saying in this is the jury got it wrong, and Johnny Depp did abuse Amber Heard, and Amber Heard was not lying. So let me know what you think about that. And so I don't really know why they're saying it has a chilling effect. Also, what is usually a defense is whenever you're reporting a crime, not making a op-ed and publishing it, but reporting a crime. So I don't think it really has any chilling effects on that. So I wouldn't, if that's all they're talking about in this, that's a long brief of 71 pages for nothing. Certain to rule, Amici respectfully submit the brief in support of Amber Laura Heard. Amici are qualified to understand and express the interests of domestic violence victims in Virginia with respect to matters of common concern that come before this court. Amici requested consent from all parties to file this amicus brief. Ms. Heard consented. Depp opposed. Shocker. Statement of the nature of the case. So right here, they're just talking about the nature of the case, and I bet they paint it in the light most favorable to Ms. Heard. So Amber Heard had a Washington Post op-ed, used his lawsuit to Mr. Depp used his lawsuit to retaliate against Ms. Heard for obtaining a temporary restraining order against him 6 years prior, hopefully to escape Mr. Depp's increasingly insufferable abuse. Mr. Depp painted the traumatic events that led to Ms. Heard's protective order as an elaborate hoax perpetuated by Ms. Heard against Depp, the true victim. Wow. Well, the jury found that he was at least one of the victims. So Mr. Depp's ploy was successful. So they continue to use this language that the jury definitely got it wrong. The jury's singular focus on allegations of physical abuse is contrary to the evidence presented at trial and demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the law. Interesting. The conduct by Mr. Depp laid bare at trial in text messages, audio recordings, videos, and his own testimony demonstrated that in addition to physical abuse, Ms. Heard was the victim of emotional, verbal, psychological, and other well-documented forms of abuse. Well, what was Mr. Depp subject to? Was he subject to those? Because that's what came out at trial. These additional types of conduct all fall within widely accepted forms of abuse. The trial court rejected Ms. Heard's request to provide the jury with an instruction on what amounts to abuse, and as a result, the jury improperly disregarded non-physical conduct when considering whether actual abuse occurred. And more importantly, whether Ms. Heard believed Ms. Depp's conduct amounts to abuse as required under the actual malice standard applicable in this case. So that's very interesting that they're saying that because the judge didn't give the jury a jury instruction to define what abuse is, that the appellate court should overturn the verdict and it should go back to a jury trial and restart a whole new trial. Do you think a jury would need a term, a definition to describe what abuse is? That seems kind of like reaching for straws. I think that's a little far-fetched. Abuse, most people know what abuse is, and maybe there was someone on the jury who didn't know what abuse was and needed instruction on what amounts to abuse. But let me know what you think. Do you think the jury needed instruction on what abuse is? Amici respectfully submit that in conducting an independent review of the record, this honorable court will find ample, uncontroverted evidence of various forms of abuse suffered by Ms. Heard at the hands of Mr. Depp. Ms. Heard's statement that she became a public figure representing domestic abuse could not be false, let alone made with actual malice. The court should therefore conclude that the trial court erred in setting aside the verdict. Such a finding will not only rectify the injustice served in this case, but also send a message to those who may seek to improperly use of defamation lawsuits or other legal proceedings as means to retaliate against victims of abuse. Indeed, an abuser's misuse of legal processes to further control and coerce their partners, referred to as legal abuse, is itself a widely recognized form of domestic violence. The verdict in this case is part of a growing and troubling trend of individuals accused of abuse and harassment using lawsuits as a tool to silence victims. Interesting. I definitely have seen ways that the legal system can be used to manipulate and abuse others, but I haven't seen anything where it's abusive in a libel, slander, defamation lawsuit in this situation. New York Appellate Division recognized sexual assaults remain vastly underreported primarily due to victims' fear of retaliation. It does not escape us that defamation suits like the instant one may constitute a form of retaliation against those with the courage to speak out. So they're saying that people are not reporting that they've been sexually abused because they're afraid of retaliation. And for example, a defamation lawsuit is what they're afraid of. I do not think that is what they are afraid of if they are not reporting it. And working at the Tulsa County District Attorney's Office, working on misdemeanors, there were many reports of physical abuse by women who unfortunately did not continue to cooperate with the prosecution, so it was a difficult case to go forward on. Now, in some cases, it was possible for me or the rest of the state to go forward on that case without a victim because, one, they might be afraid of retaliation, but not in the form of a defamation suit. Probably more physical because if they got beat once and they told on them, then they might get beat again. So I don't think that the victims are afraid of defamation suits. I think that is far-fetched. And fortunately, on some cases, you do have enough evidence to go forward on a domestic assault case without a victim. It is more difficult, but sometimes you do have enough evidence to go forward without a victim, and I've done that before. So, but I think that retaliation of a defamation suit is a little far-fetching as well. Similarly, in her report to the General Assembly, Promotion and Protection of the Right to Freedom of Opinion and Expression, Irene Kahn warned of a perverse twist that women who publicly denounce alleged perpetrators of sexual violence online are increasingly subject to defamation suits or charged with criminal, libel, or false reporting of crimes. Let's see what they cite. Okay, I'm not going to read that, but that is interesting. I have not seen many defamation suits. I get calls into the office of guys or girls wanting to sue their ex-girlfriends or ex-spouses because they say some mean stuff, and I never take those cases unless I might refer them to someone and say, hey, look, they're going to charge you an hourly rate. That's up to you if you want to pay them an hourly rate, but the odds of you actually recovering something is extremely slim. In this situation with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard has quite a bit of money. So there's actually somewhere where you can recover money from. But in most ordinary situations, there's nowhere to really recover any money. This phenomenon creates a troubling, chilling effect on survivors of abuse seeking to access justice to protect themselves and prosecute abuse. Already, clients of Amici have expressed fear as to how Depp v. Heard verdict may impact their ability or willingness to pursue legal remedies against domestic violence. A meritorious reversal of this case, which has been widely publicized and closely watched by victim support and advocacy groups around the world, still serve to reinforce that the rule of law supports and does not hinder the ability of survivors to all forms of abuse to speak up, seek help, and encourage others like them to be brave enough to do the same. So, assignments of error. So this is what they're saying, requesting that the court do. In stating their position, Amici support Ms. Heard with respect to assignment of error number 14, which reads, the trial court erred in denying the motions to strike and set aside the jury's verdict with regard to Mr. Depp's failure to prove actual malice by clear and convincing evidence. So they want the judge to set aside the verdict that was found for Mr. Depp, because that there was no evidence of actual malice by clear and convincing evidence. Clear and convincing evidence is the burden of proof that the prosecution, so Mr. Depp and his attorneys, had to prove, and that's more than 50%. So there's a few different burdens of proof. There is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a criminal burden of proof. There's clear and convincing evidence, which is lower than beyond a reasonable doubt. Lower than clear and convincing evidence is preponderance of the evidence, which is pretty much more likely than not, more than 50%. And so clear and convincing evidence lies somewhere between those. If you're on a jury and you ask the judge to define that, he will say he cannot do that for you, which is really frustrating because who knows really what clear and convincing evidence is. The jury kind of has to come up with their own definition in that situation. But nevertheless, statements of facts, they're saying that Ms. Heard's statement of facts is accurate, and they incorporate it. Thank you for saving us the time. On appeal, this court may overturn the trial court's denial of a motion to set aside a jury verdict if denial. Oh, this is standard of review. Really boring stuff, in my opinion. It's just saying what must happen in the standard to where a appellate court can overturn a jury's verdict. So their first argument, the jury verdict was plainly wrong to ignore uncontroverted evidence of widely recognized forms of abuse. Mr. Depp's defamation claims put front and center in the question of whether Ms. Heard believed she was a victim of abuse, and yet the trial court refused to provide the jury with an instruction on the full scope of what qualifies as abuse. And this is back where they're saying, Judge, we needed a definition for what abuse was. Was it just words? Was it just physical? Was it both? Was it emotional? They wanted a jury instruction defining it. The jury was left instead to reason by negative inference based on the instructions it received on the elements of falsity and actual malice. As a result, the jury's verdict completely ignored uncontroverted evidence that Ms. Heard endured numerous forms of well-recognized non-physical abuse, including emotional, psychological, and verbal abuse. The jury's verdict was therefore plainly wrong and must be set aside. Undisputed evidence demonstrates Miss Heard was subjected to emotional, physical, and verbal abuse. The court's independent examination will reveal that the record is replete with audio recordings, videos, text messages, and other indisputable evidence establishing the non-physical abuse suffered by Miss Heard. Also, it is a very high burden to ask the appellate court to overturn a jury verdict. Something pretty severe has to have gone wrong in that case, and it's a uphill battle already for Miss Heard and for the people filing this amici. Ms. Heard testified, and Mr. Depp admitted to numerous instances of vicious name-calling, manipulative attempts to control her career, accusations that she had been unfaithful, and threatening behavior. For example, Mr. Depp repeatedly degraded Ms. Heard verbally. Audio recording, Mr. Depp called Ms. Heard a yikes. In another recording, I'll let you read those right there and right there. Shut up, fat ass. That's not too nice. But Miss Heard was also not being kind either. So this amici brief definitely seems to be extremely one-sided. You sicken me. Wow. Mr. Depp would claim that Miss Heard was bitching. All right. And that was on the trial transcript. Audio recording having Mr. Depp accused Miss Heard of having another lover while describing her feelings as screaming like a banshee. Mr. Depp confirmed that a recent argument with Miss Heard was a bloodbath. Mr. Depp admitted that drugs and alcohol turned him into an angry, aggro Injun in a blackout who sprayed rage at the one I love. Recounting how he drank all night before he picked Amber up to fly to LA this past Sunday. Ugly mate, no food for days, powders, half a bottle of whiskey, 1,000 Red Bull, vodka pills, 2 bottles of Chompers on plane. And what do you get? So obviously it goes through quite a few text messages, audio recordings, trial transcript, testimony. But they're only saying the bad things that Johnny Depp has said or did or texted, and nothing of it that Miss Heard did. Mr. Depp also subjected Miss Heard to emotional and psychological abuse, including repeated, alarming, and violent attempts to exert control over her. Mr. Depp brandished a knife and implored Miss Heard to cut him with it. Despite Miss Heard begging for Mr. Depp to put the knife down, Mr. Depp refused and told Miss Heard to cut me. If you don't, I will. After Miss Heard finished filming a movie with Billy Bob Thornton, Mr. Depp severed his finger during a drunken fight with Miss Heard and then wrote on a mirror with a mix of paint and blood from his finger, starring Billy Bob and Easy Amber. As documented in videos and photos, Mr. Depp's finger was severed during a violent outburst in which he caused approximately $50,000 worth of property damage to a home the couple was renting, including smears of blood on the wall, plaster damage, and broken ping pong table. So this goes through some of the things that the amici believe that was very manipulative on Johnny Depp's side, but it never goes through anything that Amber Heard did. Mr. Depp repeatedly acted in a threatening manner toward Miss Heard, engaging in physical, violent outbursts and destroying property. Mr. Depp's bodyguard testified that during an argument, Mr. Depp called Miss Heard effing washed up before he threw down every rack of clothing and shoes in her closet from the second floor of a loft apartment. Mr. Depp was captured on a video violently slamming cabinets in front of Miss Heard. Mr. Depp admitted that during an argument with Miss Heard in a trailer, he punched a bathroom ripped a mounted phone off the wall and repeatedly smashed it against the wall because another woman had touched Miss Heard in an intimate manner. Doesn't say anything about hitting her. We'll see if they do say that. These examples of Mr. Depp undisputed conduct were not an exhibition of common couple violence experienced in some relationships. By contrast, Mr. Depp's behavior fits a paradigm of serious chronic abuse designed to dominate one's partner and to exert general control over the relationship, which is manifested in the use of a wide range of power and control tactics, many of which are non-physical. Numerous factors scholars have identified to assess the risk of grave danger and death in an abusive relationship. Has the physical violence increased in severity over the past year, and or has a weapon or threat from a weapon ever been used? Is he drunk every day or almost every day? Does he control most of your daily activities? So these are from a article by Jacqueline Campbell, assessing dangerousness, violence by sexual offenders, batters, and child abusers. Just going through some of the questions that you should ask to see if someone is actually experiencing abuse. Has he ever threatened or tried to commit suicide? Is one of the questions. The undisputed fact that Mr. Depp brandished a knife and implored Miss Heard to cut him, or else he would do it himself, evinces not only a propensity for physical violence, but also his attempts to manipulate Miss Heard. Mr. Depp's pervasive drug and alcohol use turned him into a self-confirmed monster. Depp was also no stranger to jealousy, as he himself texted that he becomes irrational when Miss Heard is doing movies. I became jealous and crazy weird, and we fight a lot more. Even putting aside whether Miss Heard believed that she was abused, which is all that the law requires in this case, the uncontroverted evidence outlined above clearly demonstrates that Mr. Depp engaged in abusive conduct, and Miss Heard was, in fact, abused. So their second point under that first heading is Virginia law, as well as national and international authorities and scholars, recognize Mr. Depp's conduct as abuse. So what they're saying here is the jury got it wrong. The jury doesn't know what abuse is. The jury needed instruction to tell them what abuse was. And because of that, the whole verdict should be overturned. And that scholars, international authorities, experts know what abuse is. Those jurors didn't. And because of that, the experts are telling you to overturn this verdict because she was abused and she was telling the truth. Do you think a judge should overturn it because third parties are filing a motion saying that they're experts and they really know what abuse was, and the jury didn't know what abuse was? So that's what they're really saying in this section, and they go through a long, drawn-out way of explaining that, which domestic abuse is real, but obviously the jury is siding with Johnny Depp and does not feel like there was abuse by Johnny Depp on Amber Heard. And this is the power and control wheel. This is what we used quite a bit when I was at the Tulsa County DA's office and realizing what domestic abuse was. It's definitely power and control, using coercion and threats, using intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, using male privilege, using economic abuse. So those are all ways that there is abuse, and that is really something that is interesting to look at and see exactly the different ways: displaying weapons, abusing pets, destroying his property, smashing things. So interesting to look at that, but they continue to say the jury doesn't know and didn't know what abuse was. We do. Trust us. Overturn the verdict. Their second point is allowing the verdict to stand creates harmful chilling effects on abuse victims seeking relief. So this is probably their better point out of the two. Still not a good one, in my opinion, but it is probably the better one. So they introduce it. The verdict, why did they say TikTok? Justice, hashtag justice for Johnny Depp, hashtag on TikTok obtained 15 billion views compared to just 8.2 million for I Stand With Amber Heard. That's funny. Especially that they show that. That means, I don't know, a lot of people were watching the trial, and I don't know that a lot of people sided with Johnny Depp. I probably wouldn't have included that in there. So the first point under this second heading is the verdict discourages domestic abuse survivors from seeking protective orders, which they kind of controvert their reasoning in that they say the challenge statements at issue in this case do not mention the May 2016 protective order Ms. Heard obtained against Mr. Depp more than 2 years before her op-ed was published. But Mr. Depp's legal team was intent on framing the very act of Ms. Heard seeking a protective order as the heart of the injury for which Mr. Depp sought redress. So you can't use defamation from a protective order, but so their first point doesn't really make sense and is kind of counterintuitive to their whole argument. They're saying the verdict discourages domestic abuse survivors from seeking protective order. Also, look how they word things: survivors, not victims, survivors, from protective orders, but in reality, they can still file a protective order and not have any legal consequences of defamation. In Virginia, protective orders offer many avenues to shield those abused, and it is crucial that victims continue to assess such resources. So if they're that shielded, I don't understand what their point they're making. The core purpose of the protective order statutes is to protect victims of domestic violence. Yes, that is right, but the Johnny Depp Amber Heard lawsuit was not based off of that. It was based off of the Washington op-ed. The chilling effects of the verdict stand to impact thousands of Virginians who have secured protective orders by reducing their willingness to obtain or hold on to these important tools. So they go on to their second point under this second heading. The verdict emboldens retaliatory defamation lawsuits, further chilling victims from seeking relief. The first point was better. The protective order one, still not a good one. The second one, not good at all, in my opinion. Prominent artists, athletes, and business executives are among those who have filed defamation lawsuits in response to allegations of sexual misconduct. And the reason why though prominent artists, athletes, and business executives, those that are more prominent, are filing lawsuits is because really their reputation is much more damaged by these statements because of the level that they're on. Since they're so prominent, those statements reach thousands, hundreds, millions even. And in everyday life, I mean, those statements that we make may reach, well, now with social media, they reach more, but 5, 10, 100, maybe 100,000, maybe a million. So it's on a much higher scale for the prominent artists, athletes, and business executives. So they want to do more to protect their reputation. Critically, however, the use of retaliatory defamation lawsuits extends well beyond the celebrity spotlight. No, it doesn't. It has become a strategy through which perpetrators lock survivors into years of abuse. Really, I rarely see this. But the other thing is, they're saying that these defamation lawsuits prevent victims from seeking relief and coming forward about the abuse that they're sustaining. But if you're on the other side, say in Johnny Depp's side, if they take this away, they're saying that the judge should overturn the verdict because of the chilling effect that it would make. Now, this is a terrible argument because how's Johnny Depp supposed to protect his reputation? Amber Heard lied about the abuse, and the jury found that, and so now they're asking the court to overturn it because it could have a chilling effect. Well, how is anyone supposed to protect their reputation then if they're not allowed to file a defamation lawsuit? On the flip side, if you were to overturn this verdict because of the chilling effect, that gives the person accused of the abuse no avenue of relief, but also that gives unlimited access for people to continuously say that they're abused about anyone. There's no repercussions for doing that. So that is a terrible argument because that would open up Pandora's box on the other side of it as well. Since 2014, over 100 defamation lawsuits have been brought against individuals raising sexual assault and harassment allegations, and cases have been filed at a faster rate since 2017. Let's see what they quoted. She said, he said, 100 defamation lawsuits since 2014. So that is less than 20 a year, more around 12. I don't know. I don't want to do the math right now. But I had 20 cases a day at the Tulsa County DA's office. Maybe a week, but 20 specifically domestic assault cases a week. And now they're saying that over 100 defamation lawsuits have been filed because of raising against individuals raising sexual assault and harassment allegations. That is an extremely small fraction. So are we going to use this small, tiny exception for a whole reason to change the whole reasoning and overturn this jury verdict, is what they're pretty much saying. So let's use the exception as the rule. The threat of being sued deters many victims from speaking out about abuse is supported by scholarship as well as experiential evidence. So they're really just relying on their experience and expertness in this. The verdict fosters a climate of second-guessing victims. I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, in this case, the second-guessing was actually correct. So, I mean, that is also a terrible argument. So, as in the conclusion, for all the foregoing reasons, Amici respectfully request that this court set aside the trial court verdict and deny Mr. Depp's claims for relief in their entirety and with prejudice. So what do you guys think about this? I do not think that the court will, they'll read this, they'll take it into consideration. I don't think they'll consider it very much. But what do you guys think how much weight do you think the court should give to this? I don't think the court's going to change its mind because of this brief. But again, we can go out and file a brief tomorrow, asking the parties if they have any objection. We can file a brief about supporting Amber Heard, supporting Johnny Depp. So anyone can go do this. But what weight do you think the court should give this, and what do you think the court should do? We'll have to follow it to see what happens.